Welcome to How Things Connect, where we share insight and wisdom on healing, empowerment, and regeneration. I am so excited and delighted to have, as my guest today, my friend Elliot Kotek. Elliot is a leading mind on purposeful content, technology for good, innovating for humanity, and storytelling for social impact. He's the founder and CEO of the Nation of Artists, collaborating with thought leaders to create aspirational, society-changing content, technology, and campaigns. He's also the founder and editor-in-chief of Beyond Cinema magazine and co-founded Not Impossible, showing how radical collaboration can lead to solutions that respect people's humanity. Elliot has collaborated with the likes of Aflac, Campbell's, CNBC, Intel, Lego, McKinsey & Company, National Geographic, NBC, and Netflix, just to name a few, where his projects have included producing the first ever user-generated feature film across 5 continents, storytelling about a social robot for kids with cancer, and enabling technology for a farmer with ALS to independently tell his wife he loves her. He's been honored with a Kellogg School of Management Innovation Fellowship and Alumni of the Year accolades from Australia's Monash University. And he's received personal recognition from the US Congress. He's won 5 Cannes Lions, 4 South by Southwest Innovation Awards, an Emmy from 4 nominations, 2 Clios, and many more awards and honors. Welcome, Elliot. How are you doing?
Thanks. It's always weird to listen to yourself be heralded on an intro. So thank you for those kind words.
I'm so excited to have you on the show, and just also so great to see, because we met quite a number of years ago, and which we'll talk about. And it's incredible just to see your journey and all of the things that you've accomplished, because you've just incredibly inspired.
Yeah, the beard was very much not grey back then.
So, you started your career essentially as an M&A and biotech lawyer in Australia and New York. And then from there, started attending the Lee Strasberg Theatre Institute in New York, which is how we met. And then after that, went on to do a professional program in screenwriting with UCLA. And then after that, sort of, you have delved into content creation and tech innovation, making powerful impact in the world. So how did you make those shifts, and why this journey? Tell us, please.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. It's like when you look back at it, you're like, well, what did I start off doing, right? Is a question that you ask yourself, or what have I always been doing or always been gravitated toward? And for me, the common thread was that I was always a writer, right? I mean, from when I was very little, I didn't just like writing, I had a need to write, right? So I always had like a little, a journal nearby. I always had stuff going on. I was always writing little stories or little plays and things like that from the earliest possible memory of a kid who has capacity to do so. And so I think that the journey around that has changed and shifted, sometimes because of community or familial and societal pressures as to what is a career and what's not a career, which is probably something you understand pretty well. And then it becomes that personal journey of, once you take agency over your own destiny, then what is it that you choose to do, and what are you willing to do to get there? And for me, moving from Australia to New York was definitely a huge part of that narrative. I always loved New York. It always had that adrenaline and energy to me. And it was that sort of place where you would lose $20 and find $50, or you would lose your way and ask for directions, and the people you ask tell you not to go where you were supposed to go, but to come with them on an adventure for the next 48 hours. And that turned into something even better than what you had originally intended. And so when I moved to New York, it was also this I guess, a freedom to be away from the people who have known you all your life. And so you don't have that weight of expectations and associations and affiliations that you have just by virtue of growing up in a city and staying in that city. So in Melbourne, Australia, I had gone to school, I had gone to university, I'd had my retail jobs and other things that you do along the way. I had my professional jobs that I had started. And so all my communities, my various communities, the people I'd played sports with, they were all in the same city. So you couldn't really go anywhere without someone knowing and having an idea about you, of what you are to them, how you fit in the world. And so I think going to New York gave me that freedom to really go back to the thing that I love to do on a daily basis, which is write. And so even though when I first got there, I started working at a law firm, really that was just a means to an end. It was a way to get a visa in order to stay in New York and to live in New York, which obviously is a crazy expensive city. I had already run out of my Aussie savings that I had brought with me. And so when I started going to Strasbourg, to the Lee Strasberg Theatre Institute in New York, that was the beginning of that wholesale investment into that next iteration of what it is that I wanted to be. And that timing was also pretty unusual in that it was the year 2000. So people were kind of also like, what are you going to do with the next millennia? And then not only that, but it came on the eve of a big change in New York in 2001, precipitated by 9/11. And when 9/11 happened, New York changed fundamentally for a while. Like, people were asking each other what it is you want to do. There were people writing those novels that they'd put on the shelf forever. The cafes were filled up again with people who were just doing whatever it was that made them happy, satisfied, fulfilled. And so likewise, because I was at theatre school and I was still working as a lawyer at the same time, up until 9/11. After 9/11, I went to theatre school full-time, stopped being an attorney at all, and gave it a shot, and saw where it led. So from then on, it just became a case of saying yes to all the cool opportunities as they arose, rather than trying to tether it back to something, some sort of safety net.
You brought up such an important point, which is the environment is such a big piece of it. And we can get sometimes a little bit stagnant in the same place, whether it's a place emotionally, a place physically, a place professionally. And a lot of times we do need to take ourselves out of that environment, and we need to take ourselves out of where people know us and have that courage to actually disrupt ourselves, is essentially what you did.
Yeah.
And in some ways, that's exactly what I did as well. And saying yes. And is that a big part of your process in terms of life, in terms of, I don't know, accepting projects that come your way?
Yeah, in two different tangential ways. One is that for some reason, I'd like to create external expectations of me. And then, so if I say something enough, it becomes expected by other people, and then I have to do it, and it places an additional pressure on me. So even when I moved to New York, I had goodbye parties for like 6 months in Australia. And I'd be bumping into people and be like, wait, you haven't gone yet? I thought we had a goodbye party for you like 3 months ago. And I was like, yeah, I'm going on June 20th or whatever, right? But it was like, I had to tell people that to make it real. So it created that expectation that then led to me going. And similarly, from a career standpoint, it's like with projects, it was less thoughtful than that. It was less planned than that. It was more, this is interesting. This is what's keeping me awake. I have to do this. this is what someone else has presented to me in this moment. It seems interesting. The person seems nice. I think I'm going to take a chance on it. And it was a case more of saying yes to just about everything, and in some cases too much, than it was about planning stuff out and having a trajectory that I wanted to hit. Like, I loved writing, and in order to create that external expectation, I signed up for UCLA's professional program because they had an expectation of me of creating 10 screenplay pages a week. And so even if I wrote them all the night before the class, there was that external expectation and a cost associated with it that you're paying for, right? When you pay for school in the US, that you don't want to waste that. It's kind of like paying for a gym membership at some point. Like you have to go, because, you know, you're
Not necessarily. A lot of people never go.
Right. That's the idea anyway. And so creating that external process for myself. But yeah, just saying yes and having other people rely on you and want to get things done has led to these incredible opportunities over time. And I think the most important was that I wasn't hung up on it being a business at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And I was prepared to go into close situations in terms of getting your rent covered and those sorts of things, and eating, you know, 2 pounds of pasta covered with Campbell's cream of mushroom soup, and saving your money for the times you went out with friends, or you know, having like a big, you know, thing of orange juice and a big thing of coffee and being okay with that for a couple of days, you know. So it took some level of, I'm not going to say sacrifice, because it was also joyful, you know. There's a romantic notion to being a writer that cannot be denied in my world. And so I think that journey for me, and getting back to that grassroots of it all, and that joy of just the page or the screen, and having, that's one thing I've never been short of, which I'm super thankful for, is never been short of ideas. And then just saying yes to having those opportunities and taking that time to write those screenplays and be in contact with people who I could collaborate with. And there's always people who are at the same stage that you're at, who are on the other side, like who have a camera, or who want to be editors, or who want to be PR agents, but are junior. And so you can always team up with someone in this creative world, who, you know, people who want to get it done as well, or want to be at a level above what they're currently doing. And I think that's the beauty of the film community, and especially the documentary community, is that there are so many people willing to go on that journey for you, with you, if you have a vision and some clarity about how to get there.
Well, it's about showing up. And that's what I've been consistently doing, is showing up for others, showing up for yourself, showing up for your passion, showing up for, you know, the opportunities that are presenting themselves. And that's what I'm hearing very much.
Yeah, you got to find other people to whom to be accountable, so that you can actually get to those goals. And then you have to, you know, you have to have the ideas as well, right? So, I mean, as you know, like my company, Nation of Artists, has a motto, which is ideas plus empathy equals impact. And it's just like, I've never felt it to not be true. It's like, you can have all the ideas in the world, but if you take them to places that aren't being receptive of them, or you're taking them to people who don't have any need for them, then you're not going to have the impact that you want. You've got to have some sort of empathy and understanding of the people that you're collaborating with or wanting to collaborate with. And so you need that empathy part to go with the ideas in order to create the impact. And conversely, you can have all the empathy in the world and be a total empath, total feeler. I hear you, I understand you, I feel myself in your shoes. But if you can't crystallize an idea that will then advance that position, or assist that position, then you're just going to be stuck in a bag of emotions and also not get to the impact. And so for me, it's like, you've got to have both, right? You've got to have the ideas, you've got to have some empathy and understanding, and that is what leads you to an actual tangible output.
I mean, it sounds very much like, and I love your approach, and it sounds like very much a balance between, it's a very yin and yang balance, actually. It's a very emotional process. Art always is. And yet, in order to create that impact in the world in a tangible way, you've got to find a way to actually get it out there. So yeah, I'm learning a lot.
Yeah, always.
And how you create structure to allow for your art to happen is also what I'm hearing. So writing, which you've stated many times, is obviously your passion. What does storytelling mean to you, and why is it important?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I really, to some extent, I've never really thought about that question of what storytelling means. It's just always been a part of who I am, like, however that can sound non-pretentious. It's storytelling as a word has become so commodified, I feel, over the past few years, that it's kind of lost some of its meaning. People calling themselves storytellers, like, can often be associated, can be accompanied by an eye roll, right? Like, oh, another storyteller. But it's but the thing is that it is the way that we connect as humans, right? Like, there's a great saying that I learned from this guy who works at the Omidyar network, and he said, no stories without numbers, no numbers without stories, in terms of the way when he presents something. And it's also so true. If you're trying to get something across to someone, you can have all the numbers in the world, COVID being a perfect example of this, right? You can have all the scientists and all the numbers and all the things that are leading you to, or climate science or whatever, so you've got all the data. You've got for cardiac health, for diabetes, whatever, like, whatever story you're telling with numbers, some people are going to respond to that, and some people need a story to go with it in order to be compelled by it. Right. And vice versa. You can have people who respond to stories all day, but at some point, maybe they need to hear what the numbers are. What are the statistics? What are those value points? How is it going to benefit them? How is it going to benefit others? What are the odds? And so there's, by making sure that you're crossing both those things off the list, stories and numbers together, you can reach anybody on any given day. You could have the most hardened scientist who normally only listens to statistics in order to make decisions. And then she, on that day, may have had something personal happen that makes her more emotive and emotional that day. And so you telling her a story about how something happened to a specific person, and that could change her mind about a whole topic of conversation, right? And likewise, you can have someone who's normally only about the personal and the emotional, who is just so at the end of their well that on any particular day that they decide, no, I'm going to stop listening to my heart today. I'm only going to listen to my head. And so you really need to approach things from those two levels. And for me, that's the basis of for me, for storytelling, is that if I know I'm going to try and tell a story about some piece of technology or some cool gadget that's coming out and how it might impact our world, it's not telling you just about the specs of that thing, the technical specifications, the patents that it has, the scientists who have worked on it. It's, how is this going to affect a single person in their daily life, right? And then that becomes more accessible to you, right? And so it becomes something that you are more able to envision, touch, smell, approach in a sensory way. And so a lot of it comes back to, when we were at Strasbourg, it was all about the sensory experience, right? It's like, how do you approach things like a child approaches things? How do you remember that a pen is not an inanimate object? If you tap it, It's a drumstick. If you put it against your cheek, it is cold. You know, it has other properties. We use it every day as one object for a single purpose. But everything around us, if we approach it like a baby does and put it in our mouth and give it a chew, it's like, you know, which a lot of people do with pens and pencils, obviously, for that reason. We go through a process of discovery or rediscovery with things. And I think we need to do that with the things around us that we become accustomed to. And once we do that, if we can relay things with the same sense of openness from a storytelling perspective, then we're much more likely to reach a broader range of people.
Definitely, and also create greater impact that way.
Yeah, I think so. I really do. I think you need to have a point at which whatever story you're telling is accessible or relatable,
Right.
or, you know, you've got to, and that's part of that empathy standpoint, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting because I was actually going to ask you this question later about the mantra. And I was actually going to say, you know, a lot of people have ideas, and you know, do you feel that, you know, I guess you've answered it, but do you feel that the empathy is key? And the empathy, by that I mean the connectability, the accessibility, and clearly that's a big part of the equation. And in many ways, actually, a lot of people have ideas, to be honest. But if you don't connect, it just doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, it's funny when you listen to people who make commercials, because a lot of the things that I do on the branded side, so there's like a few different buckets of the stuff that we do, but on the branded content side, essentially it's being paid for by a brand. It's not an ad necessarily, especially in the way we hope we do it. But when you mix with people who are in the commercial world, there are people who are really good at just doing, they call them like pieces and prices spots, where it's like, we just want to know how many things we're getting and how much they cost. And those are always going to be part of the commercial landscape, because you need to convey, we have a product, here's how much it costs, and this is what it does. But on my side, I'm often dealing with products that are new, right? Or ideas that are new. And in order to sell those, I think you really need to bake them into either how they're going to change our lives on a daily basis, or how they're able to bring greater meaning to life for someone else. And so because everything we do is about impact and has to be about impact, then even in terms of what we're selling, we're not selling products, we're selling the why of why a company exists, or the collaboration that the company's having with a nonprofit like Habitat for Humanity or the United Nations, or things like that.
There are actually 3 particular projects I wanted to highlight for the audience. And the first one is the documentary feature film you did for Netflix, Little Miss Sumo, which you executive produced, which looks at female wrestlers in Japan that resulted in the main subject, Hiyori Kon, being named to the BBC's 2019 list of the world's 100 most influential women. Tell us a bit about this project and the impact it made.
Yeah, Little Miss Sumo is it's kind of like the most appropriate title, right? Because it's reminiscent of Little Miss Sunshine. It's reminiscent of like the Mr. Men books and the Little Miss books, and there's a sense of optimism and hope that is associated with those stories as well. And Hiyori really embodies that. And that came to me from the director, Matt Kay, who's a young British filmmaker who's just awesome and just such a nice guy, and such a beautiful shooter of content as well. And also just does things that he finds to be personally important, although he just recently directed a documentary about TLC, the pop group. which is, so it's like that was, you know, as a director for hire, but just a lovely guy. And I was working on at the time on a film about Danica Patrick, arguably the most successful female race car driver of all time. And so people were kind of trying to connect me to other projects about female sports people in male worlds. And Hiyori was certainly that. You're looking at someone who grew up in this beautiful mountainous region of Japan, where a lot of the sumo heroes come from, and who grew up idolizing these heroes, competing in sumo as a kid because they allow girls to compete alongside boys in tournaments as youngsters. But then as soon as they hit like adulthood, essentially, the national sport of Japan, sumo, becomes closed to 50% of the population, which is just inherently wrong, right? Like it feels wrong, sounds wrong. Like it's because, you know, if you have a national sport that half the people in the country can't play just because of how,
especially when you're allowing them to participate, and then, you know, the women or the girls are excited, and then it's like, oops, sorry.
And they just expect that their natural interests will deviate at some point as well, right? There's like a misogyny to that sense of expectation. But they just, you know, disallow them from turning pro and don't provide any avenues for it. And the body of the federation is all made up of males. It's a historically male institution. I think it predates the government in many respects, so has certain powers that the government doesn't even have, within that sort of strange mix of how certain countries have both the traditional passages of rights and laws and their constitutional passage of rights and laws. And so you have this person who wants to bring something that they find so joyful, and wants to be part of it at a professional level, who is for many years stopped from doing that, just by virtue of her gender. And so having this piece be about gender parity and gender equity at a time, 2019, coming off the women's marches of the previous couple of years, of various other, the Me Too movement, of other kind of movements that have been happening, the ERA laws in the US being sought to be changed and equalized. And so you just had this great groundswell behind her. And she's awesome, you know, she's the best in the world at what she does. And there are other countries that compete at an amateur level. And so she's able to compete as an amateur and represent Japan as an amateur, but you're expected to quit that as soon as your college years are done. And so she, telling her story was just so joyous, because she's very much at home in who she is and what she represents, and very strong in her vision of what she wants, which is just an equal competition alongside the men. She doesn't want to necessarily compete against the men. She knows that's not really a reality for sumo, but wants to have the same opportunities for women to compete as professionals as the men have as professionals. And I don't think that's too much to ask, except for the fact that sumo also has a religious component to it in Japan, where the sumo wrestlers are kind of revered as gods. And so there's again like this additional element of a perceived narrative and a narrative truth that has been baked into the culture of Japan around sumo, that she represents a deviation from.
So what did you follow what happened after, you know, after the film and after she was named one of the most 100 influential women?
Well, that was awesome, by the way. Like, I mean, the film premiered at London Film Festival in the UK, and then it went to Tribeca Film Festival in New York, and to Michael Moore's Traverse City Festival in Michigan, and Doc NYC, and a whole bunch of other really top-notch documentary festivals. And then was acquired as a Netflix original and put out on Netflix. And the fact that she got named as one of those BBC's 100 most influential women in the world was huge. She had been featured, and the film had been featured on the front page of the Japan Times and things like that. And so, but seeing her name alongside people like Megan Rapinoe of the US women's soccer team was really cool, and meant that she was going to have more voice in talking about what she's going through, what other Japanese women are going through, and what her plans are. Because that's the other thing, is that she's not just someone who's up against the system. She has a vision for how to address it, and she knows like that it is doable, and it is achievable. And following her afterwards, we are doing a feature documentary called Suwo. So we've just switched the M around to a W. And so we continue to be invested in her story and the lobbying of the Federation to change its rules, as well as some of the other issues that go along with it, like female mayors can't stand in the ring to welcome sumo to their towns when there's a tournament. They have to stand off to the side, which is kind of embarrassing and humiliating when their male counterparts are standing in the ring. This was kind of brought to a height when someone collapsed in the ring, a male announcer collapsed in the ring, and two female medical technicians ran into the ring to save his life. And they were performing CPR, and at the same time as them performing CPR, you can hear over the loudspeakers that they're telling the women to leave the ring. Right? It's saving someone's life, and yet the culture is so so tense around women being in a sumo ring that they're literally telling these women to leave the ring even though they're saving someone's life. And so that mayor whose life was saved is pro-change now as well. And so there's a bit of a groundswell going, and so we're happy to pick up the baton and try and take it to that next level, as well as to explore the history of sumo in Japan for women, because there was a time when they were allowed to compete in a weird way, and then there was also a time when it was highly fetishized, where women were allowed to compete but only on their knees and only blindfolded. And so there are these things that we just think are interesting and should be explored and become part of the conversation in order to create the change that we want to see.
No, absolutely. And I mean, that's just an example, just one example of how powerful storytelling can be. I mean, this is a story that, you know, obviously her own journey and how she is pursuing her career and all of that is of paramount importance. But just to have her story being told, all of us learn about it, and you know, giving her that voice and a platform is incredible. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. She's amazing.
Yeah, and glad to hear there's another film that's
and there are silver linings too that you don't often appreciate. Like, we knew it was a film about gender equity and gender parity, but we didn't appreciate and about stigma and tradition, as well as ignorance, and yet we didn't appreciate that it's also, for some people, a story about body positivity. Here is a very strong woman who is in the Western world be considered plus size, right? For whatever that's, you know, it's always a relative statement, but she's very at home in who she is, and loves who she is, and she's super fit and charismatic and cool. And we found that when we showed the film in Tribeca has a program that takes the film out to local schools, and for some people, her being so positive about her own body image and her own abilities as a bigger lady was a very positive experience for other people to view on the body positivity side. So it was really nice that it had additional kind of positive messaging that came out of that project.
Excellent. It's amazing. Well, the two other projects I actually wanted to mention. The first one is Project Daniel, and the second one is Dawn's Voice. both of which are not impossible projects and collaborations. And in Project Daniel, you and the other founder of Not Impossible, who is Mick Ebeling, launched and established the first 3D printing prosthetic lab in the world, and successfully built a prosthetic arm for Daniel, a Sudanese boy who lost his limb during the war. And the second project is Don's Voice, which is the story of Don and Lorraine Moyer, a farm family debilitated by ALS. And through the project, software was created to actually allow Don to communicate independently without a third party. And that's hugely powerful. And, you know, tell us please more about Not Impossible, because you guys are doing incredible things. And also, what's to me also interesting is that you guys are using or utilizing crowdsourcing and crowd solving of healthcare issues by providing low cost and DIY tech. So it doesn't even have to be that complicated. It's just a matter of, again, it seems, having that empathy, spotting an issue, and then just kind of like, all right, we have the brain power here, let's figure this out.
Yeah, I mean, when we were doing those projects at the time, this was like 2013 to 2015 that those projects kind of took place, and it was really apparent that there were technologies being released on the market at the time, like 3D printers and laser sintering machines, and that were becoming consumer accessible for the first time. And the goal there was, how do you take things that are accessible to, again, people in a commercial world, right? The global north, whatever you want to call it. And what happens when you provide access to people who normally don't have access to something? So they don't have physical access in a way, like it's not adapted to them. They don't have the means, maybe they're missing a limb, or they've got trauma, maybe they're unable to use something. How do you adapt it so that they can use it, and what would they use it for? It might be financially inaccessible. It's just priced at a point that is just too expensive for that person to get a hold of it. And what would they do if they could? Or it could be geographically inaccessible. It's only available in certain markets, in certain places. And what would happen if you took it outside those places and outside those markets? And 3D printers was one of these examples of something that was like a lot of hype. The hype curve was going bonkers on 3D printers, and companies were popping up with massive valuations and getting backed and funded. And it was becoming available to consumers for the first time. You could order a MakerBot at the time, and it would arrive at your house within a couple of days, and you could start 3D printing. And what does that mean? And so for a lot of people, it meant creating iPhone accessories, little stands for their iPhones, and little trinkets and little creatures and little figurines of their favorite characters. And so the greater question there, which is a question that I still ask, is, you know, how can technology be used for its greatest purpose, right? What do you need to do in order to give it its greatest life, right? And so for that, for Project Daniel in particular, it was like the first time, and again, at the beginning of this kind of branded content bubble, like branded content was not yet a thing, but there were companies that wanted to be involved in things in a way that was less egotistical. And the companies that were doing it well were also doing it because there was this incredible groundswell on social media for people who are more of an aspirational mindset. We were calling them millennials at the time, but it's certainly not limited to millennials, and certainly not limited to Gen Z. It's anyone who wanted a company to be associated with something positive in the world, right? And so Intel, who make the chips that go in a lot of our, obviously in a lot of our electronics, and an engineering company called Pressipart, helped fund this project where we sourced a lot of talent, engineers and designers and physical therapists and others, to come together in a room and to help we had a picture of Daniel up on the wall because Daniel was in a story in Time magazine about the effect of the president of Sudan at the time, who had been bombing the Nuba Mountains, this area of the southern border of Sudan, people who had fought against the Sudanese, but when the border was drawn for South Sudan were still on the north side of that border. And so he was bombing his own people, these civilians, and causing a lot of casualties, which included a lot of people losing limbs and a lot of kids losing limbs. And Daniel was one of those children who, when they heard the planes coming with these bombs and signaling a bombing raid, ducked behind a tree, holding on to the tree, and his body was protected, but his arms were not. And the blast essentially damaged his arms so badly that the doctor operating in that region, Dr. Tom Katana, he had to amputate both of Daniel's arms. And so we had this vision of this boy who had to have a friend feed him, had to have a friend clothe him, and he had this beautiful relationship with this other kid, but he did not have either of his limbs anymore. And so we thought, with the 3D technology that was happening at the time and the 3D printing, there was a guy by the name of Richard van Aars in South Africa who had created something called the Robo Hand. Richard was a carpenter, and he had actually severed his own fingers and then created 3D printed fingers with a mechanical mechanism that, as you bent at the wrist, pulled these cables down that then pulled your fingers down, your fake fingers down. And so it gave him the ability to clasp. And we were thinking, how can we adapt that or adopt that? And so we brought this team of people together in our workshop at the time in Venice Beach, who then kind of molded a 3D printable prosthetic limb that we then sent over to Africa with a small team of people with 3D printers and materials, who then found Daniel at a refugee camp, one of the largest, if not the largest, refugee camps in the world at the time, and made him an arm and enabled him to feed himself for the first time in 2 years. And the cool thing was that we then set up the machines, the 3D printers and the materials, and our team trained other people in that region how to make these limbs, and they subsequently made them for a handful of other people. But it was the storytelling that was really the best part, because then we had people calling us or sending us emails, or sending me emails from Brazil and all these other regions saying that they downloaded that file, that 3D printable file, and had done a similar thing for a kid in their community. I had this beautiful girl in Vietnam. She and her caregivers sent me emails saying that she had none of her limbs were fully developed, and so she got around on a skateboard and was super positive and went to school, and her watching the photos of her watching Project Daniel on a computer screen, and then conveying that she then knew that people were working on solutions for people like her, and that her life wasn't going to be defined necessarily by the condition in which she currently found herself, that there was hope for these other tools that were going to become accessible to her. Like, that's life-changing sort of stuff, right? And so that was pretty amazing. And those projects at the time, even though that limb wasn't the best limb that you could make, and there have subsequently become like these amazing companies like Open Bionics in the UK, and incredible people like Sophie Olivia de Barada, who makes has something called the Alternative Limb Project, who does custom-made prosthetics. There are people making such better things out there, but you have to have the idea of wanting it and knowing that these materials are out there and those tools are out there, and having that accessibility of that mindset reach places like Sudan was so constructive to the conversation. That, look, these are people who live in a very small town on the top of a mountain in the And so if it can reach there, and if that can be the place where this world's first 3D printing prosthetics lab can be established, then there's no excuse for why we can't get these technologies to other people in other places and make it more accessible everywhere. And so that was kind of like a real driving force. And what happened as a result of that from a commercial perspective is that the project won a ton of awards, was recognized all over the world. The limb itself and ones like it were put on display in design museums in London and elsewhere. And it was just part of that can-do maker mindset that was occupying a lot of the narrative at the time. And what I love about it still to this day is that it stands for permissionless innovation, which is something that I wholly stand for, right? Which is that no one decides whether you get to innovate or not. It used to be the case that you used to have to work for Intel or Boeing or GE or one of these big companies with all these resources behind it. Or it used to be the case where you had to be in academia and work at a lab in an amazing institution like a Harvard or Yale or the University of Michigan or, or Drexel or any of these incredible kind of institutions that had the resources to train you how to do things. But now, it's not the case. Now it's like you are really only limited by your imagination and your collaborative efforts because we are all connected to each other. And so if we have a purpose, if we have something that we want to ask people for, we can put it out there that we're working on something and find like-minded people or enough like-minded people to help us on our path. And so in that case, like a 3D printer, obviously it's even easier in some sense because, and especially if you're in the Western world or have some finances, right, or can find some finances, but you can order it online. It'll arrive within a couple of days. Even if you don't know how to turn it on, you can go to a YouTube video and ask, how do I turn on this 3D printer? And it'll have a video how to do that. Then if you want to make anything specific, you can go to file servers like GitHub and either find it and track it yourself or put out a call to developers around the world. And engineers love to solve problems. So that you might say, I need a piece that does this or that, and have some people create that file for you. And then you print it out. And so there is nothing that is stopping you. Again, even in after the earthquake in Haiti, 3D printers were on the ground there, and one of the things that they designed for themselves was it looked like a peg with a lock on it, and it was being used as an umbilical cord clamp because there was so much disease being transmitted by blood at the time, and a lack of ability to have clean and hygienic practices because of the situation, that they created this umbilical cord clamp that just stopped the blood from spraying after you cut the umbilical cord from a birth. And so even that small thing that was created with a 3D printer that they designed on site was able to help that local community be safer, be healthier at a micro cost. There were, at the time, baby incubators being made on the African continent out of the parts of old Toyota 4Runners. A baby incubator is this glorious machine that is $20,000 a unit. And yet you had these ones being made out of these Toyota 4Runner parts that for a couple of $100. And the beautiful thing I thought about it as well was that in order to fix it, if something goes wrong, you don't need this incredible technician from the company to come fix it. You just need a local mechanic who knows how to work their way around the heating and air conditioning system of a car,
I mean, it's great because it just reminds us simplicity is actually a good thing. And it doesn't mean that the solutions that create the most impact need to cost the most.
No,
Absolutely.
totally not. Exactly.
That's the opposite. And big takeaway of what you just said is the model of how Not Impossible does what it does is so much. I feel that the piece that's underlying it is the connection, is that accessibility. So, like you said, connecting in the sense that you are not just, okay, this is just, okay, I'm this company and there's 10 of us and this is it. This is just the brain pool, right? And it's this ability to collaborate and willingness and to put the ego aside specifically, especially, and to say, who can do something really great, the best in what they can that I can never do, and actually find the best of each of the categories that are necessary to combine to make this, to create the solution that's needed to help people. And then what's great also is the storytelling part is then you tell a story about that. You then open people up to the possibility of this actually happening and being that can work, right? And then that gets picked up because it's just inspirational to begin with. And, you know, you get recognition, you get awards, you get honors, then that propels to give this story more voice. And then you connect with more people, which then influences how they think of the world and what, you know, what is possible in life. And, you know, I think that's something that I really want to highlight. As I know you're explaining this beautiful, just these beautiful projects and how they've been helping people, I do want to emphasize that it's what allows you to bring not just this is a cause or this is someone we want to help, to bringing in everything that's necessary. The technology, right, which is not like everybody doesn't know, but not every single person knows how to, you know, is knowledgeable in robotics, you know, and then you bringing in the artists, the storytellers as well, and actually creating something together. And I feel that is so much of it's so healing on top of it and brings so much joy because it's such a basic part of our humanity. So I think that's amazing.
I was just going to say, and it's also like why Not Impossible was kind of limited, you know, in terms of it was unlimited in terms of its openness and appeal. Like it wanted people to come from everywhere and work on a project, but because they were also volunteers for the most part, right? You could only take their time in a respectful way for a certain period. And what was great about that time was that by telling the story of what we were doing, I was meeting other innovators who were singularly focused on creating solutions, who were working on the top version of those solutions for the past decade or the past 5 years or even the past couple of years, who were driven to create something exceptional and had the skills and some resources maybe behind their companies that had allowed them to devote themselves to creating a particular solution, but who didn't have the storytelling skills to take it further, to tell the market why it was necessary, or to introduce it to the communities who would most benefit from it, and to get their support and get their understanding.
Right, exactly.
And so because there were thousands of those people who were working on these singular solutions in sometimes, you know, these beautifully scientifically applied ways where they were closed off from most of the world to focus on this brilliant piece of innovation, meeting them and helping them open themselves up to the world became a much more important, for me, path to take, because there were thousands of them with ready-made things and ready-made ideas that were waiting for that empathy in order to create the impact, or waiting for that approach in order to create that impact. Whereas what we'd been doing at Not Impossible, even though during that time, we created 5 projects over 2.5 years that ranged from a device that was able to be switched on and off using just thought power, you know, using brain waves, to you know, these incredible devices for Don that allowed him to communicate with Lorraine, which was just kind of an ocular recognition system, allowed recognized his eye movements and could track where he was looking on a screen in order to create words, and then had an automated voice that kind of came with that then allowed him to essentially create speech. But all these tools that we were creating took half a year to a year or more to create, and were never the best version of what was available or could be available, because there was not a commercial mindset to them.
Mhm.
right? Which was a beautiful thing from an ethos standpoint, but it was so limited in the impact it could have. And so if I had an equation that idolized impact, where impact was the end result of what I was trying to achieve, it became much more idealistic for me to work with all these innovators who were working at the top of their game, but who didn't have that story associated with their product, to start collaborating with them and see how far we could take, things like you mentioned, like the social robot. So this
Yeah.
incredible duck, which is for kids who are going through chemotherapy, which does have 4 patents on it, but which was available and made available for free to every kid diagnosed with cancer in the US, and now further. So this got in the hands of every child diagnosed with cancer in the US, pretty much, in 240 plus cancer institutes and hospitals around the country, every state of the nation. And it was because there were people who were professional at what they do, who were coming together to create these things that could be long lasting, that had a sustainable program behind them, that had a support system behind them once they got off the ground. And so the tool itself could be sustained. It could be sustained over time. Like, we weren't able on Project Daniel to continue to service those machines. We sent parts as parts were needed, but that there wasn't a way of building an ecosystem in those mountains. And the product itself, again, it was more about the idea of the product that was so powerful, because the product itself, just having that single mechanism of opening and closing and being not non-reliant on electricity, was brilliant and thoughtful. And it being waterproof essentially as well was thoughtful and mindful, but not a game changer compared to some of these bionics and other things that are being developed. And so how do we get more of the things that are at the top of their game? How do we get access to those to more people? And that's by partnering with scientists and engineers and others who are working in that field, who are the best at what they're doing, who are creating amazing things, who don't have that level of knowledge about how to create a marketplace or how to take that amazing human thing to more people. And so that's what I've been focused on the last few years, 5 years, is getting as many of those products out there as possible that can have as much impact as possible.
Tell us a bit about your 4P approach.
Yeah, and again, like this is kind of along those lines of permissionless innovation and things like that. Is that it's there's this classic marketing definition of the 4Ps, which are all about the price of the product, etc. But what I like about the current environment is that it does feel unlimited, like, because we are so connected with each other, that I do feel like anything that we put our mind to, like you say, like there's a group of people that can come together to achieve anything, right? And so the 4Ps mindset is exactly that. If you have a passion for something, that's great, but applied passion to me is what purpose is. So purpose equals applied passion. It means that you've found something that you want to put your passion towards. Because a lot of people say, oh, I don't know what my passion is, or I haven't been able to find my passion, or how do I know when I found my passion? And that's a very valid thing to say. And when someone says to them, you know what you should do? Just do something you're passionate about, which we hear all the time, right?
And most
hear it
people
all
are
the
like,
time.
I don't know what I'm passionate about.
Yeah, I don't know what I'm passionate about. But that's the thing, is like, if you can find something that you're passionate, that you're willing to bring energy towards and apply it to something, it could even be attaching it to someone else's passion project, right? Someone else's purpose, right? So if someone else says, I need help doing X, and you know how to give that help, and you can be passionate about that, that for that moment can be your passion. Your passion doesn't have to be singular. It can change. and your purpose doesn't have to be singular, and it can change. And so for me, having a purpose just means having an applied passion. So taking that passion, taking that energy and apply it to something. Like find something that you like, the people, you like the idea, you like the potential outcome, whatever it is, but apply it to a purpose. And so once you have your passion, you apply it so it becomes something functional, becomes a purpose. Once you have a purpose, start telling people about it, right? Because once you say, this is my purpose, I want to do this project, or I'm trying to get to this goal, I'm trying to help this community, or I'm trying to be better, and you start putting that out there, then all of a sudden you'll be connected to other people who want to either help you in that, or to staff you on something, or to take advantage of that purposeful spirit that you have. And they'll find a way to make it real, right? So it's like, you might find that you become part of a community that you were seeking. You might find that your family members start telling you about someone else that they've heard of who's trying to do something similar, who they'll connect you to. You can put it up on a notice board somewhere on any sort of social media and be connected to a whole community of people that are interested in the same thing. And so once you have your passion and you apply it to a purpose, you'll find your people. And once you have your people, anything is possible. So that's the 4 Ps. It's passion, purpose, people, possible. And I think I think for me, it's held true in every scenario. If you want to get something done, you just have to, it kind of goes back to that creating external expectations thing, right? It's like, you just have to start telling people about it, right? And then the universe will start responding.
Right.
Right.
I mean, that's like literally creating your reality.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's literally how it's done, actually, on a functional level.
And it might take a week, or it might take a year, but you'll be on a pathway for it, right? Like that's the road.
Show up for your passion, like show up for your passion by showing up and sharing it, actually.
Yeah, or attaching it to some sort of project, right? Which is having a purpose for it, because otherwise it's just energy.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's such a good point. And thank you so much for just illustrating, illustrating the path and what people can do, because there's so many people want to do good for the world. Most people want to create a better world, leave the world a better place. But it's like, okay, how do you do that? How do I do that? And it's exactly the quandaries are, what you just said, sort of, oh my God, but I don't know what my passion is, and many others. And actually, I'm going to circle back to that. But speaking of purpose, tell us about your new feature documentary, The Hidden Power of Purpose.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, the Hidden Power of Purpose is something I've been working on for just over a year now. And what we are doing is we've had a few conversations with some incredible people who have found their pathway of how they want to live more purposefully. And so those 4 people have found their purpose in different ways. And this is individual purpose, not corporate purpose that we're talking about, obviously. And so they have found, one of them found their purpose by hearing the voice of God and having a prayer answered. And that was powerful for him to go down a path to help people through his voice, and then through charities that he's established. So one came at it through divine intervention, through God. But of course, there are many people who don't subscribe to that, and that can come to you in any ways. And so there's another person who just had her experience, her lived experience, was that she was someone whose mother left when she was very small and went off to New York when she was growing up in Puerto Rico, in order to go get a better future and to secure a better future. And she wasn't reunited with her mother until her mother had secured enough resources to have her come live with her again. And she noticed that there was a certain path to get out of that kind of systemic poverty, which was education. And she ended up having a great education, pulled herself up through that, has a family, and wanted to create that reality for other Latino families. And so, I would say Latinx, but she refers to it as Latino, so I'm using her term. And so she started a charity called Latino U College Access, which helps people from non-English speaking backgrounds pursue a pathway to college in the US, and hopefully then to a more lucrative remuneration over the course of their lifetimes. There are statistics that say that a college education on average results in about $1 million over the course of a person's lifetime in terms of revenues being and compensation being received. And so if you think about that over time, that means buying a house potentially, right? Which means that you can set up your next generation a step ahead of where you came from, because they might not have to pay rent if they're able to inherit that home. And so she's found her purpose by replicating essentially her experience and trying to take care of others who are having the same experience. There is someone else who found their purpose through tragedy, a reactive purpose. Their son was killed in the Sandy Hook shootings in Newtown, Connecticut, tragically, and he put his career as a musician aside and co-founded Sandy Hook Promise, one of the leading charities in the world of training schools against gun violence, as well as helping kids recognize the signs of distress in young children. And their goal is to reduce and help erase violence against kids. And that was found as a result of a tragedy that perhaps he would never have found that pathway other than that tragedy. And so we've got situations like this throughout the film, but then we're also speaking to scientists about the science of purpose and how being purposeful as an individual, our bodies will transform. They will help us achieve those goals. They will decrease the inflammation in our bodies. They will regulate the activity in our brains in order to help us achieve that target. And our brains, it seems from all these experts who are, this is not a soft science anymore. This is not something that we're thinking might be true. These are hardcore biometrics, hardcore brain scans, hardcore science and hardcore data that we're looking at, and that these scientists are looking at from the top universities, that are showing that if we live a life of purpose, we may in fact, all other things being equal, actually live longer than someone who is living alongside us who doesn't have that purpose.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And so it's been fascinating. We've been talking to people from the University of Michigan who were cancer researchers trying to help their cancer survivors survive longer from some pretty substantial forms of cancer, like ovarian cancer, which is particularly aggressive. And they found that the people who are living longer post-treatment are the people who have found a purpose, or can acknowledge and identify that they have a purpose. And so it's really, and we've talked to stress scientists and doctors and epidemiologists from the University of California, LA, from people at the UCSD, at the Institutes for Aging, people from the Milken Institute, people from the University of Michigan, behavioral psychologists, neuroscientists, neurosurgeons like Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who's more known for his appearances on CNN as their chief medical correspondent, but is still an assistant head of neurosurgery at a hospital in Atlanta. And so we've talked to all these scientists who are showing us that purpose is not just a nice to have, it's actually an imperative that may be as important and is probably as important as diet and exercise to helping us sustain a meaningful life.
Absolutely, because having that meaningful life, puts us in a certain emotional state, and that obviously regulates our hormones. I mean, we could go on and on to talk about this, but we underestimate because we're sometimes overly in our heads again, and we get caught up in a microcosm of whatever the daily stresses are, whatever is required of us, and we lose track of this connection with ourselves, truly with each aspect of ourselves, not just the work part, not just the brain part, but not just the mind, but how are we feeling, right? How are we then we're losing track of, our connections in life, familial connections, friendships, etc. Because again, we're too focused on being busy. And this seems now, as we're talking about it, so rudimentary, and yet it's easy to get off track. And I think one of the big things that, throughout your whole story and everything that you've been talking about, that I want to really highlight is the joy. Looking at your life, I mean, you must be pretty happy or pretty inspired like all day long, no?
Yeah, I used to say this to people all the time. I was like, every time I turn a corner, every time I go to a conference, every time I go speak alongside or listen to other speakers, all I'm surrounded with are people who are looking at innovation and how it can solve problems. Like one of our current projects is this incredible project called fortomorrow.org, which is a collaboration between the UNDP and Hyundai. And it's a platform where people can upload their grassroots innovations for problems in their local communities. And so you're surrounded by these people all the way around the world. And these are not wealthy people necessarily. These are not people with extra time on their hands. They're people who are solving problems on a daily basis. And when you look at these problem solving, these solutions, they're incredible, right? They're taking plastic waste and turning it into furniture. They're turning it into bricks. They're turning it in waste into biofuels. They're turning waste into soaps and detergents. They're employing local families and uplifting their communities. And if all you're looking at and all you're watching are these incredible networks of people who are solving problems, then you think, oh, we're good. The world is good. The world is solid. We've got it taken care of. And if we can join corporations with these people to continue to build these sustainable momentum around these grassroots solutions that people at local levels really want and that work for them, then we're good. The problem comes when you then walk into a hotel room and they're blasting whatever the news is of the day. Exactly. And I'm not going to say either whether it's Fox News or CNN or MSNBC or whatever. Yeah. And those, our national news networks are unfortunately screaming from these extremes. And because there's just a lot of that screaming going on, it takes you away from all the good work that's being done. And so for me, just being able to focus on all the good work being done, it's phenomenal. And it's so important that like even the science around how purpose is just as beneficial, even more so for people who come from a lower socioeconomic background, who need to build up or essentially have something that's similar to a resilience, right? Because if you have a purpose, it essentially allows you to ride lows as well as you ride highs. You don't have these extremes of behavior and extremes of emotional responses. A sense of purpose means you're able to go through with a bit more regulation. You're able to change your weather. One of our scientists puts it like you're able to change your emotional weather a little bit more with more control. And because of that, if you have additional stresses in your life that are race related or financially related, then a sense of purpose can help you just as much or more.
And this conversation is so important, and it's also so much about why I'm doing this podcast as well, is that it's about narratives, and it's about, again, back to the power of storytelling. It's not, don't mean to overuse this word, but the point is that there are a lot of maybe not so constructive and negative narratives out there that, whatever, they exist, right? And so the issue is not trying to necessarily try to dispute those, but it's really about creating your own narrative, one that you can share with a lot of people that are feeling exactly the way you do. And then that energy feeds into itself and just creates more and more. And that I think that is something we often, or people often, overlook, is the power in that sort of exponential way that we can generate that energy for ourselves and for each other.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It requires that coming together, and requires that that heart opening. And the many years that I've known you, you've just become just this more and more heart opened person, and it shows. It's a very high frequency.
That's right. I mean, like, even if you're doing what to some other people externally might seem like the most basic task, if you have a perspective on why you're doing that, right? It might not be like, there's all those beautiful stories, like there's that person who's pushing a wheelbarrow up a hill that's full of bricks, and that person seems joyous, and someone who watches this person push this pile of bricks up a hill every day is curious about what's so joyful about pushing bricks up a hill. And the perspective, like, and one day, this is kind of like a famous anecdote, it's like one day they asked this man why he's so joyous pushing this pile of bricks up a hill. You're just pushing bricks every day up a hill, why could it be so joyful? He's like, I'm building a cathedral, right? Like, his perspective was that he was contributing to this beautiful thing that was being created in his town, and for him that was a sense of, that was purposeful, right? Like, he had a perspective on it. But even if it's not related to that task, if you're pushing bricks up the hill because you know at the end of the day you're getting $10, $100, $1,000, whatever it is, and you know that that's going towards yourself, your health, your wife, your spouse, your partner, your child, someone else's child, helps you buy a piece of candy for someone who gives them a smile, whatever it is that you're utilizing your environment for and constructing a perspective around and having a why for, right? Like, there's those famous Viktor Frankl quote, Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, one of the kind of preeminent books on this subject of purpose, you know, purpose in life and purposeful psychology and positive psychology. And he said, and so there's like quotes that surround this, right? As well as Nietzsche's quote, which, you know, some people like Nietzsche's philosophies, others don't. It's certainly, like, obviously he as a character philosopher has had his approaches misused and used by the wrong sorts of people. But one thing that Nietzsche said was, he who has a why can bear any how, right? So if you have a purpose for what you're doing, if you know why you're doing something, all the extraneous things, all the external things that are making it potentially difficult for you, you can bear those if you have a strong enough reason for doing it. And, you know, obviously we ascribe to applying that to good versus evil, but that's the same as everything going back to, you know, the invention of fire.
And this is, again, so appropriate right now. I mean, people, you know, people having gone through the pandemic, people still struggling, and it's that resiliency which you beautifully explained and shared with us. It is actually applying your passion into purpose that gives you a certain resiliency, and that that is actually a wonderful solution, you know, to when you're feeling stuck. And you know, which, you know, it's not been easy for a lot of people recently. And I do want to bring a little devil's advocate question, which is this: another sort of like the one of the very common blockages people get to, like, as you explained earlier, is, oh, but I don't know what my passion is, right? The second one that I hear all the time is, well, that's great, and this is my passion, but how am I going to make a living? How am I going to support myself, support my family? What would you say to that?
Yeah, and this is actually something that I've had people say to me a few times, is like, oh, well, I've got to do this job, right? But my passion's over here, but I've got to do this job. And I was like, well, what does that job give you? And they're like, well, it gives me the money I need to survive and do all these things. And you're like, well, what if, like, is there any of that money, could that go toward something else? Do you have like an entertainment budget or a food budget, like not just your regular food, but a going out budget? Do you have a holiday budget? Do you have like other things that you try and do with that money? And sometimes the answer is yes, right? Like, I have things that I want to buy. There's a bag that I want. Oftentimes it's something material. You're like, well, how about you find a project that fits your passion, right? If you put that money towards getting to that community, like either attending an event, a concert, a conference, whatever, where those people in your passion group live, and experience life, or can buy you the tool that can enable you to start doing that passion, whether it's a nice calligraphic pen or a art easel or a 3D printer or whatever. Like, what is it that you can, I say, like, use your situation toward your purpose, right? To further your purpose. So it could just be that having the money from that job means that you've got your rent and everything is taken care of. Then instead of, if it's truly your passion and you truly get a reward from it, then maybe take an hour, borrow an hour from something else to pursue it. It doesn't need to cost you anything. Or start telling the world about it a bit and seeing what the world offers you up as solutions. You don't need to be the only problem solver for your life, right? If you are truly passionate about something,
crowdsource purpose.
Right, it's like that thing for me about setting external expectations. It's like, I was really excited about New York. I wanted to move to New York, and I wanted the world to give me the momentum to go. Right. And so I started telling people, oh, I'm going to move there in 2 years. Like, I literally said, in 2 years, I'm moving to New York. And so I'm going to do all these things along the way to make it, to raise enough money to fund me buying that ticket, for me to be able to pay rent for 4 months to 6 months, for me to be able to pay for food for 4 months to 6 months. And so everything became centered around that journey. And so I don't think that there's anyone stopping you. And then as a result of telling people, I'm moving to New York in 2 years, I'm moving to New York in 18 months, I'm moving to New York in 12 months, in 6 months, you're like, oh, you have to speak to so-and-so, has a cousin who lives there, not always there, maybe you can house sit, and that'll save you rent for a couple of months. Oh, so-and-so's there and has a spare room. I know that they're really good at taking in people for a couple of weeks or to help them find their feet. Or if you need a warm meal, my cousin lives there. I've told them that they have to buy you dinner one night. You know, there are all these things that can come into your orbit as a result of you telling people about
sharing that and showing up. Exactly.
So I don't think that there's any barrier to entry. I think we can offer up excuses to ourselves, and we often do, and we all do. But at some point, if we just verbalize it and make it external from ourselves and take it outside of our own orbit only and put it into other people's orbits, we'll be surprised by the number of suggestions, other things that we can, if we're open to them, then we can listen to them, that we can take them in, that we can start to catalog them, that we'll start offering up a groundswell. And sometimes, like, there was an event that I couldn't attend that I really wanted to attend, and I love the organization so much that I asked, like, what else could I do to feel a part of that event, even though I can't attend? They're like, well, actually, we have some Native American delegates who are struggling with their getting their flight money to come to the event, but we've already comped them the tickets to the event. Do you have, like, the means to donate a flight or something like that? And I have a lot of points from my time traveling on these various projects, so it might not even be an ask that necessarily costs me anything, right? That I'm able to provide, 25, 50,000 points to someone else to attend an event, so that they can get that spirit that I would normally get from that event. And so there are just ways that you can use the things around you to either make it feel like you're getting the benefit, or by getting joy out of someone else getting the benefit from it. That can all lead to that passion, that community, being a part of that community, embodying the spirit that you want to have, and it just further ingrains you in the people that believe the way you do, that think the way you do, that want to help you succeed later on, right? And so you can plant those flags for when the time is right for you. You can start having those conversations for when the time is right for you. There is no barrier for that first point of entry.
Incredible. And that, what great advice. And I thank you for really taking the time to detail it out, instead of just staying super high level, because that's often what people miss, is that actually, okay, what's the how? What are some of the examples, some real world examples, which you've given so many of. And it's incredibly, incredibly inspiring, Elliot. And I'm getting so energized talking to you, and sort of getting excited about everything that I'm doing. And it's incredible just having this conversation with you. And just amazing, amazing, in how you've been sharing your passion. Thank you so much for being so generous.
No, thank you. I think, like, a lot of people feel
Your passion.
alone and lonely, especially during these times of the pandemic and through social media and things like that. But you can, to try and flip that switch where you can feel engaged and a part of a community and collaborative and purposeful. I think that changes everything about your feelings about loneliness and aloneness, if you can feel tapped in some way. So anyone who's feeling even the slightly bit lonely, encourage them to kind of check in with what it is that they are or were passionate about, and trying to get back on that path towards something purposeful that can really uplift the spirit.
Absolutely. And how about joining your community, or how can people find you? Is it at the Nation of Artists website, which I'll put in the show notes?
Yeah, the Nation of Artists website is, like many things, we're good at telling other people how to tell their stories. And so we haven't updated our own website in many years. But it's a good sign that we've been busy. So LinkedIn is always good. Through the Nation of Artists website is totally fine as well. But LinkedIn, Elliot Kotek at LinkedIn, is always great. Instagram, things like that. Nation of Artists at Instagram. But certainly, yeah, reach out. Where we've got limited bandwidth, but a lot of love, and so we eventually get back around to everybody. And if we can help connect you to the right people to help you fulfill your passion, then we're happy to help provide any guidance that we can in that realm.
Amazing. And again, thank you for being on the show and just being who you are, sharing your energy and your amazing spirit. It's been incredible conversation.
Yeah, but you're living it too. So thank you for all you're doing for the community, and also on your deep journey.